Hello and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we are in, I feel like I call this my crafting corner. We don't do too many of these a year, but I have personally had my TikTok feed covered with these sequin ornament projects, and I've decided I want to join the fun. I have gathered some supplies to make my own sequin ornaments, like very inspired by those vintage classic ornaments. I don't really decorate for the holidays in my house, but I feel like as I get older, I have more of the desire to. This style of ornament is my jam. I just really connected with this style, and of course I'm putting my own kind of twist on it. I have some bases here which you can tell are quite pastel-y and not like a traditional Christmas color necessarily. And I'm really actually excited about this because this feels really authentic to me. I haven't decorated much for the holidays because it hasn't felt authentic to me. So I think giving this a shot, doing something kind of super girly and sparkly for the holidays is gonna work really well for me. I also have some normal, sorry, all of the package rustling, some normal styrofoam balls. I have a lot more pins than just this, a lot of pins. Although I think I might have bought too short, so I might need to order some longer ones because I didn't really know my game plan when I ordered everything. And then I have like a bunch of seed beads, a bunch of sequins. In fact, so many sequins. I think I overbought on sequins, which is not shocking. If you know me, you know I tend to really go gung-ho into a new craft. So I have all this stuff. I have more stuff. My first step, I don't know how many ornaments I want to make for this video. My first step is just to get all of my supplies on the table and then to figure out exactly what I want each ornament theme to be. That's kind of step number one. And then from there, we'll go into making ornaments. I plan on basically making an ornament a day for a bit. I know I probably can't make more than one a day because of my hand problems, but I am prepared with braces and thimbles and all of that good stuff because I want these up in time for, I host my mending circle, so I want this up in time for that. And in general, my goal is to have this video up for you guys relatively early in December, so there's also that. First things first, we're gonna start sorting and compiling and figuring out exactly what I'm doing with all of these ornament options. Actually, before we hop into the sorting of supplies, I want to show you a few places that I went. I went to my local Recreative, which is like a thrift store, but for art supplies, to see what I could pick up here because it's better for the environment and also a nonprofit. And then after that, I went to my local bead store to see what I could get there. And otherwise, everything I ordered online, and I will have links throughout the video too, but they'll pop up at the bottom. It helps support me if you shop using those links, if you decide to do this yourself. So I have spread all of my supplies out on the table, and I have them kind of in categories of ribbon, big beads, seed beads, and sequins. And then I'm just kind of like color matching and seeing what I like and putting them all in a bag. There's not a ton of rhyme to reason or this. And of course, if I change my mind later, I'll change my mind later. I'm sure I will learn a ton of things as I go about what I like to actually create with these. But this is kind of my starter, is just getting everything sorted and thinking about the colors and how the colors are going to all play with each other and all of that good stuff. So pretty straightforward here. Of course, if you actually planned before you bought things, you wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but I was just kind of chaotically buying things, so that's the way that went. The first one that I decided to do was this kind of like periwinkle double sequin with a seed bead ball. This is going to be a straight up completely covered ball. I chose to try this one first because I know I'm going to be doing bigger sequins, so this should take me less time in theory and be a good one to learn on because I'm completely covering it in sequins as opposed to some of the satin balls. So that was my in theory here. The way this is going to work is I'm going to show you the process of me making it, and then I'm going to show you each ornament at the end with how much it costs to make. The first thing that I'm doing is I'm just getting the beads and the flowers on the pins. I had seen on TikTok, it seemed like this was the fastest method rather than setting up a pin with everything on it and then sticking it on the ball and doing each individually, which this makes sense to me because it's kind of a little bit more assembly line-ish. So that's what we started with. And after getting the flowers on, I am now putting on the bigger sequins on the flowers. You can see I am putting on a bead cap. This is going to be my ornament topper, and the reason I'm using the bead cap is the videos that I've watched go over the fact that you want to secure what you hang it on with multiple points of pins. So I have the bead cap, and then I'll put pins all around the bead cap through the bead cap because it has all these little holes to make sure my string is nice and sturdy and not going to pull out. And then I'm just doing the rest of the ball here. I am placing sequins in overlapping ways so the white doesn't show through, but not too overlapping to make it bulky. This was definitely more of a learning curve than I thought. I also did this kind of more randomly than I planned. I'd planned to very smartly spiral out on the ball to try to get the spacing more evenly. I found that once I actually started working, that didn't work practically for me because I would end up with gaps. So here I'm just kind of putting things on on chaotically and skipping the gaps, I ended up getting some glue out. This is just like some basic tacky glue because I felt like these kept falling out because, again, I just don't think I got long enough pins. I got the 1/2 inch pins, and I think in the future if I would do this, I would just do the full inch pins because I felt a lot more secure about them. As you can see, Spooky has come to investigate what I'm doing, which I'm not particularly excited about, and I can't blame her. It does look a lot like a cat toy, which you can see by her pawing the strings. And once she started to do that, I did move the pins out of the way because I thought she could very quickly spill these pins all over the place, and then I will be very sad and overwhelmed. And I eventually got through all of my pins that I had made, and I am now doing a second batch. I'm trying to make it about as big as the first batch I made because I feel like I got about halfway, and here I've done the seed beads. Now I'm putting on the flowers, and then I'll put on the bigger sequins after I do the flowers. And from here, I just kept dipping my pins and sticking them on my ornament. And we did end up finally with a completed one. This definitely took a little bit longer than I thought. And here is the final product. I'm pleased with this for my first one. There's definitely some gaps from the sequins where you can see the white through, which you can't really tell in this footage, but if you look at it from the side, you can kind of see down to the styrofoam in some parts. But for my first try, I am pretty happy with this. I also have the cost for this, which this one cost me about $14.29 to make. I have all the details on the supplies here, and I will say in general, I felt like these were a lot more expensive to make than I initially thought they would be. It's another day, another angle that we're trying. And here I'm first starting by cutting the ribbon. I decided I want my ribbons pretty long on here, so I had a lot of flexibility about where I would eventually put these. So I'm cutting the ribbon first, and then I'm just loading everything up, starting with, of course, the pin that's going to hold the ribbon. I want this one, which will be the purple saucer base, to just be, you know, a cute, fun little saucer. I feel like so many of the different projects I looked at on TikTok just looked so decadent and like gold and pretty, so I wanted to try that style here. With the way these bases are made, I had a really hard time getting the bottom and the top to go in straight because there's like a hole there and it's like extra dense. I don't quite know how to describe it. So this ends up definitely a bit crooked, which I guess I maybe should have waited a little longer to do a saucer, but I was excited about the saucer, so I wanted to give it a go. And then anything that I do to the top, I am going to automatically do to the bottom. Here we have, again, I have loaded up the pins. In this case, I am using some bugle beads to give some like height. And then I have some little golden beads from Michael's, which was another place that I stopped to pick up supplies, even though I don't really like Michael's much. I am just, again, mirroring what I do on the top and the bottom, and the actual base, the like bead cap of this has 6 petals, so I'm going to go in multiples of 6 to actually build this ornament up. And I'm basically, the middle is the tallest, and then I'm just trying to stagger out how tall it is. And I finally have my thimble out because I can tell already how much these projects are going to hurt my hands from just the first one. So yes, we are thimbling it to really get the pins pressed in to hopefully help my fingers feel a little less tender. And here you can kind of see how I'm trying to build up that kind of very over-the-top ornament shape. I'm already telling that this is becoming crooked and not very symmetrical, but I am pressing on nonetheless. And then once I get the top and bottom the way I want, I'm going to be placing in just some little bead decorations. I'm just using a small bead cap with then a crystal, and we're just spacing these out. I used multiples of 4 because it's easiest, so I have 8 around the main, and then I can stagger things in between it to try to get things even though I already know the top is very uneven, but I just had to try anyway. And like I said, this project is all about learning, and so far this has taken actually a lot more skill than I expected, which is on me. I craft enough that I know that crafts take learning a lot of skills, and I don't know what audacity made me think I could just build these ornaments and like not have a hard time at all having a learning curve. But here we definitely had a learning curve. And this is the final product here. As you can see, it's pretty crooked. I don't know if I just didn't get the top ribbon in right, or I don't know what the scoop is, but it's really uneven, and I'm okay with it because, like I said, this is a learning process. I still think it looks really pretty. It's not my best work by any means, but I am pleased with it. This one was definitely more expensive, but I did buy the bead caps individually at my local bead store. I think if you ordered supplies in bulk on Etsy, it would definitely net out a lot cheaper than this one here did. But this is my decadent ornament, so I guess it's fine then. It's like $10 more. Some of my favorite of these sequin ornaments that I saw play with bugle beads to give some extra like negative space in the ornament itself, so I thought it would be fun to give this a whirl. I am using some really tiny little flower sequins and then a nice turquoise bugle bead, and then the other sequin that I'm going to use to cover the base are these kind of like pastel little tiny thick discs with a lot of texture. I thought together these would be really fun and this ornament would be very like girly and kind of groovy. What I'm doing here first is loading up my pins. You will see throughout this video, I definitely change my methods across the board on how I load my pins. Here I am still staying true to the first technique of I put on all the flowers, now I'm putting on all the beads, and last I will put on all of the last little sequins. And this time I did manage to keep things a lot more orderly, and I am actually spiraling around the ball, which this is a pretty small styrofoam ball base from Michaels. But yeah, I'm just kind of spiraling around here. Again, it ended up uneven. I'm having a really hard time getting the spacing right for this, and I think it's because this is just a skill set I haven't used in a little bit of trying to keep spacing and stuff really consistent without using any measurements. Typically when I sew, I obviously have tons of measurements, but again, I am dipping the pins in glue and then I'm just stabbing them in. Here my hypermobility is definitely on display. I should have been wearing a thimble for this, but I didn't because again, I'm doing just one of these a day. And so far that seems to be working well for keeping my hands in a good spot and not having to use too many accessibility tools. And then here you start to see me changing methods. I am doing multiple pins in one hand. This is not the best for my hands. However, it does feel a lot faster to set up the pins. And what I'm doing here is I'm putting the flowers on all of them. Then I'm putting the bugle beads on all of them. And the last will be to put the sequins on all of them. Then I'll set them down in a row to put them then on the ornament later. I found this to be a lot faster than individually loading each pin with each bead. That then required me to pick up a pin like 3 times before they were done. But here I could use kind of like the stickiness of my hands, which is kind of a gross way to phrase it. But if you have sweaty hands like me, you can pick up sequins with like your finger pads. And that's a lot easier than trying to grip these little tiny things. And here is the total for this one. So far, this is my cheapest ornament yet, coming in at $11.82. And honestly, I really like this. What I don't like is I don't feel like I got good coverage on the styrofoam because of how little itty bitty the sequins were. However, you can't tell on camera, but on the naked eye, when you're just looking at this ornament, you can't really tell because the styrofoam and the sequins kind of all blend into each other because the sequins are still pastel. The sequins are definitely a lot more vibrant on camera than they are in real life. It's actually a little bit too bad that I don't feel like you can see these on camera the way you see them with your like eye in real life. Here I'm also changing how I lay out my supplies. In my earlier ones, I had each thing in a bowl, but I find with sequins, it's actually easier to pick them up straight off the desk table than it is the bowl. As you can see, Spooky is very much desiring to be involved. What I'm doing here first is for this bowl, I imagine almost like a water lily ornament. So I know I want to use these green leaves as the base. I know this is not a lily pad shape, but that's what's in my mind. So I know I'm going to use those, but then I need to figure out what series of rhinestones I want to stack on each other because I have quite a few flower varieties. I know for sure I want to use crystals in the middle. You know what? They're old enough that they are Swarovski crystals. Swarovski is getting a little weird about you using their name in crafting because they're trying to, you know, purify their brand or whatever. These are Swarovski crystals. They're really light yellow. I really just am trying some things. I have some big flowers, some little flowers, some even tinier flowers that have a little bit more 3D form. And I'm just seeing what I like color-wise, texture-wise, and everything before I actually stick anything on the ball. And once I made my decision, I stuck my first one in on the side, and then I wanted to make sure to get the ribbon up so I could get this hanging and make sure everything looks balanced. And for some reason with this particular base, I had a hard time getting the pin in. My strategy for the pin putting the ribbon in was for it to be like a 1.5" pin from my stash. So I'm using like a bottle to try to push it down because I definitely don't have the leverage. For some reason it was so hard to get into the center of this, and I assume that has to do with the pipe cleaner that's in there. But I finally did get it, even though it took a lot of effort. And of course, Spooky watches on. After that, I calculate out how many flowers I need. And now I'm going to load up those pins again. This time I'm using a pretty shallow pin because I'm not making super dense clusters of these. I'll put some glue on them. It will be fine. But I am stacking these. Basically it goes crystal, 3D flower that kind of goes up and cups it, and then the flower underneath that as well. And once I get kind of the initial ones on, I'm now kind of making them as I pin them because I'm trying to figure out my spacing because I want this ornament to feel decorated, but I also really want the blue to shine and again get that kind of water lily feeling me, even though yes, again, I understand that these are not like the correct form, but that's just the vibe I have in my head. Here I have some little tiny crystals and then blue flowers. These are the same as the orange flower that you can see, but I wanted to add an additional amount of sparkle to kind of fill some of the space, but use the blues so they wouldn't stand out too much and take away from the other flowers. So I went with this color combo and I was quite pleased to get a couple different uses out of these floral sequins. These are definitely a little bit more fiddly, these beads, but I love a little sparkle, so here we are. I mean, this project is all about loving sparkle technically. And then once I have all of them, I am pinning them into the ball. I feel like I've gotten a lot better feel for kind of rotating things around and getting things spaced evenly. While they aren't perfect, it's significantly better than some of my earlier ornaments. And here is my final ornament. I think this one turned out so cute. I love how much you can still see the satin base of this. You do see one little glue smudge that I accidentally put there. But yeah, I'm really pleased with the just overall texture and feel of this one. And this one came out to about $20.37, most of the expense going to all the specialty sequins that we have here. I enjoyed the last one that I made so much out of the satin base that I wanted to do it again. This time we are going for a very winter snowflake type of vibe. So as usual, I'm just loading up the PIDs here to get ready to just make my little winter wonderland purple ornament. So in this case, I loaded up all the pins that I thought I needed and I got everything in. I'm using some bead caps with crystals, and then I'm using a bugle bead, a snowflake, and then another crystal at the front, trying to again keep this like shimmery and light and fun. And you can again see the bead cap with all of the other little beads pinned through it to give it a lot of strength to hold. But once I completed it, I decided this was not enough because, you know, it's me, and I decided to add a lot more snowflakes. However, I didn't want them all to pop out like these, so I thought it would be nice to keep these ones without the bugle bead, but otherwise repeat the pattern. That way these are like more down on the ball, and then you have these kind of cool 3D effect sequins every once in a while throughout it, was my thought process. But because the snowflakes were sheer, I actually wanted to cover a lot more of this ball because you can see this shiny, beautiful, satiny stuff underneath it, which I found quite exciting. There was a time in my life that I wanted to be a professional sculptor, and this was definitely reawakening kind of some of those skills. So this was a very fun change of pace for me. And here is my final product. This is honestly one of my favorites. It just feels really whimsical. I think a whole series of these with different colors of the ball base, but all the snowflakes and bead caps layered on top would be really, really cute. You could then have like a matching yet not quite matching set that I think would be really nice. Definitely one of my favorites here. It did add up to be about $20 to make because of all of the bead caps that I again used, but if you bought these in bulk, I think again the cost would go down compared to buying them at my bead store. The styrofoam base with the satin overlay though do add up. I have decided with the satin balls I can actually do 2 of these. So I'm going to do 2 today, the yellow saucer and then the green one that I'm already working on, or the teal, turquoise, whatever color you want to call it. This one I want to use some ribbon as decor to kind of tie this color scheme more into some of the other more ornaments that I've made. So I had to kind of figure out how to do this, and my decision was to like kind of pin the ribbon in at a couple key points and then cut it. I didn't quite know what I was doing here. This was definitely a different technique, and these bases aren't great for the ribbon because it's really hard to get the top and the bottom flat enough, but I feel like I did good enough with it and I am happy with how the ribbon lays. It did take me a little bit to get it like spread out correctly. Definitely had some ribbon slumping in certain ways. After that, I'm loading up all these like yellow flower sequins because I know I want those pins involved. And I'm putting them with a like very blue center, again, to tie it into kind of some of the other ornaments that I made. And I'm just kind of vibing. That's what this whole project kind of turned into, is very unplanned and very like organic way of creating, which is very different from the sewing you usually see from me. This is a lot of testing and trying, and I was really happy to learn that these styrofoam balls were fairly forgiving in terms of if you put a pin somewhere that you don't want it, you could just pull it back out and replace it, because it did take me a while to figure out exactly how I wanted the flowers placed to give that kind of maximum prettiness without it feeling too busy or weird. Once I had those flowers in, I decided the ornament looked pretty bare, so I decided to try to figure out kind of like a pattern to do in between each one. I started with a flower in the center, and then I'm putting around it again these crystals that are kind of pink tying into the ribbon. And I like this because this is sort of feeling kind of like a starburst pattern almost in each one, and I'm definitely enjoying this. But it still didn't quite feel like enough, so I went back in and I added another ring around it of the plain turquoise beads that were in the center of the flowers to again tie everything together together. And then it was like kind of a very mild detail, but filled up a little bit of space because yeah, these felt just a little bit too empty, but I got them to a place I was very happy with. And here is the final result of this one. I really like how this turned out. And again, it kind of just happened so organically, and I'm really enjoying this process. The ribbon could still be spaced out better. I don't think like I'm making super amazing, perfectly symmetrical ornaments, but I'm having a good time, and I do have these, like, they make me feel happy. So that's definitely a win for me. After the last saucer, I was starting to get a bit nervous about making my other saucer, but I decided to give it a go. I wanted this one to be very like colorful, so I used my like rainbow beads that I got at Michael's again. I liked the size of these, and here my strategy was to cluster them as tightly as I could up at the top, and again build those kind of stacked, and then have them go looser and looser as they get closer to the middle of the ornament to just kind of give it, it's not really a gradient effect, but that kind of like dense to sparse effect. And here I definitely will say I felt like I much more had the hang of things. I wish I had started with more of just the balls of the satin instead of that other saucer, because I think I got a lot better at figuring out how to do my pin placement and my overall placement to make sure everything looked a lot more even. As you can see, this one still turned out a little crooked, but was much better than the other saucer one. I'm a lot happier with it, which is funny because they honestly use pretty much the same pattern. I just used different beads. But yeah, this one turned out so much better. I'm really happy with it, and it just overall feels more balanced. And it's funny because this one is significantly cheaper, and that's just because I only used one bead type. The other one I used a ton of different bead types, and I'm calculating the package of the whole beads instead of like per bead. And we're on to another bugle bead puff, for lack of a better term. As you can see, I've made all of my bead pins up, and I have just kind of sorted them by color so I can try to get my color spread out. I'm just gonna go around the 3 when I poke it in. This is here where I decided I was finally gonna end the glue because I had a really hard time not getting glue on the sequins and the beads, and like this was just kind of a pill. And at this point I felt like I had figured out how to secure the pins in a lot better. There's like a very specific angle you have to hit, and they go in really nicely and feel like they stay, versus when I was first learning I definitely hit the wrong angle where it was then very easy for the styrofoam to like kind of crumble. So there's definitely a technique to this. Again, I am very excited about this one, and this one what I actually did is I doubled up on the bugle beads. So I did 2 because I wanted this to have a little bit more negative space because the flowers were bigger, and if I only used 1 bugle bead they would all be touching because the flowers are actually technically a tiny bit bigger than the sequins. So I need them to radiate out a little further to get a similar technique to the other one. And these ones I also learned from the first one I did like this, and I made sure to place the base sequins really close to each other so we wouldn't have that weird styrofoam kind of bleed through effect that happened on the other one. So definitely some learning curve and some mistakes and things made as I got better at doing these. Also by now my fingers hurt quite a bit, but I don't always find the thimble to be most practical, so sometimes I'm just kind of gritting my way through it. And this is how this one turned out. You can definitely see patches where I didn't put the pins in evenly, or I kind of like accidentally angled them, which I can live with. I'm choosing to see them as like an anomalous design feature, so that way there's like groups of flowers as opposed to a mistake. But I definitely thought that using the 2 bugle beads stacked was successful. This was also a lot more affordable. I will say the ones that are more expensive are the sequins that I ordered from India like months ago. I took about 6 months to collect all the supplies for this project. If you aren't ordering and importing sequins, you definitely are going a little bit cheaper with the kind of more crafty sequins. And by now we've hit the point in the year where it is dark early. So in order for me to do these after work, I have to be doing them in the dark because yeah, we've been progressing. I think this project took over 3 weeks to work on. So we've been progressing steadily into more darkness. Here, what my strategy was is I had these multi-size glass faceted beads from Michael that I picked up that I am putting the biggest one in the middle, and then I am slowly like tapering them off sizing wise as it gets to the top. I'm hoping that'll just kind of add a little bit more dimension to the piece. I think it just like makes sense. If you did it the opposite way, I also think it could be interesting, but I wanted to make sure I had enough room to alternate it with these really gorgeous see-through flowers. So again, this one is a lot more covered than some of the other satin balls that I did, but I really like how it ended up because I feel like the pink you can still very much see, and the sequins are both really highlighted by it and highlight it as well. And also again here, I just feel like I got so much better at placing. Again, there was definitely more of a learning curve here than I was prepared for. Definitely at this point I had hit my stride and felt really confident about everything that I was making, which was a great feeling. I did forget to mention I had to stack some white beads to keep the pin from going all the way through both the sequins and the bigger beads, but I think they turned out nice and unified the whole thing. Overall, I love the way this ornament turns out. I think it's really pretty. I think the spacing is so much better. Still definitely some flaws, but I like it a lot more. This one did come out a little bit more expensive because, again, of the like variety of things I used. But yeah, I'm really happy with it. Now, this is the last one I'm making, which this is an all-over sequin ornament using the large styrofoam, so I knew this was going to take the longest. And then I decided I've had a ton of these Swarovski crystals in my stash for a very, very long time. Like, we're talking almost a decade at this point. So I said, I'm just going to use it. I'm going to match the color of the sequin to the color of the bead as long as that lasts, and then I'll just use white beads. And this was definitely the most time-consuming of all the ornaments. None of the other ornaments took me over 2 hours. In fact, some of them took me more like 45 minutes, but this one took me 3.5 hours to make. I did it on the same night actually as the one you just saw because at this point I wanted to be done with the project. I don't want to say I was no longer enjoying it because I was enjoying it, but I was ready to just get these done and up as my Christmas decorations. So I'm speeding through. At this point, I've completely abandoned the glue. I found for like especially like the short pins where you're just doing a bead and a sequin, I did not feel like the glue was necessary. And again, I felt like I had gotten my angles to be a lot better. And here, I don't know how it happened, but I got very off center. So now I'm trying to like re-get back into the spiral pattern that I find most successful here. Again, making things a lot denser. I will note, I didn't think about this. Using actual crystal beads made this so heavy. I don't know that I would use actual crystal again. I might try to find, I don't think glass would be lighter, but yeah, I would try to find a lighter bead because this one was heavy. And yeah, I just feel like I kept going around and around and around because I used, I think this is a 3-inch styrofoam ball and the other balls I was using were 2 inches. So yeah, this one took a while, but I kind of wanted this as the grand finale and I do feel like it successfully does that. And here's how this one turned out. I think it's absolutely gorgeous and was so worth all the effort. And I'm so glad. You can't tell, but I actually ran out of crystals somewhere kind of close to the bottom of this. So I had to sub it with other crystals from my stash that were a slightly different shape. But I'm delighted to see that you can't even notice that, which is great because this one took so much effort and I am very pleased with it. But I don't think I would do one like this again because it was so much work. And as a bonus, I made this guy here, which I think again turned out really cute. I didn't show you the process of this because it was the same as the flower one. I do think these stars were less quality when it came to the sequin, so I also think this one's slightly less successful. It also doesn't really match with the set, but I love it nonetheless, and I was glad to do it. I did this the same night. I just like dove in and did like 6 hours of ornaments straight and went straight into midnight to do these because I was just ready to have it done. With this being the last one, we're going to jump into my final thoughts on making these ornaments. All right, you see them all right here. I did get my goal amount done. I do have more I could make. I definitely have the supplies too. I just don't have the patience anymore. I will likely make a few like next year. I'm also thinking about putting them out for my mending party for people to do. So kind of final thoughts on this process. There's definitely a learning curve. I feel like have like the eye and patience for like the perfect spacing that I think would make these look better. I also would get maybe some more abnormal forms. Like I felt like working on like this guy was really fun as opposed to just the ball. Some of the balls I did the glue and some I didn't, and I think the ones that are glued definitely have stuck better and I haven't had to already replace things. So I do recommend the glue, even though you also have to be really careful about that process to not get glue all over your sequins. As you saw from the totals, these varied kind of across the board from about $10 to $30 to make. I could probably make a second one of this pretty easily, or I have the supplies to make like a second one of this. So if you were gonna do multiples, they would get cheaper because I'm just counting the price of all materials, not just the materials that I used in the beads. Also, if you were thinking ahead of time and didn't have to go to a specialty bead store and were able to buy the bead caps, like for example that I used on the snowflake one beforehand, I also think you'd be in better shape. My plan is not to leave them like this. I have a mantle that I'll show a picture of them on, that my plan is to put it across the mantle. I think it'll be really pretty and a little bit festive. And again, I'm really pleased, and what I'm most happy about is these feel very me. I was able to do like my types of colors and just decor that I feel like fits my needs and the way I like to decorate. Christmas stuff often does not feel like me, even though, you know, it is sparkly and it is festive. I'm not drawn to the colors of the red and the green, and each of these also took me about 1 to 3 hours to make. The one that took me 3 hours was actually just this guy here, because it was one of the big balls that I covered. When I did like these small balls, it's like not half the surface area, but significantly less, even though it looks the same because of the bugle beads. And definitely my favorite ones effect-wise are the ones with the bugle beads. I just really love that negative space. I guess that's probably not shocking, all things considered. I love negative space. I love playing with negative space in forms. And I think, of course, the ones with the bugle beads do a really great job and really fun job of that. What other tips do I have? Definitely use a thimble. If you don't have a thimble, even a band-aid or something, protect the pads of your fingers. Definitely take your time, be very thoughtful in your approach with these guys. They hurt to make, which I saw people on TikTok talking about them hurting to make, but I didn't realize truly how much they would hurt to make. So lesson learned. I really do like the satin ball ones. I highly recommend trying some of the satin ball ones, although I might do a whole one of these guys before you do a satin ball, because like you just kind of have to get used to it, and you actually learn a lot, even with the like them being so close together. You learn a lot about the spacing technique, because I think the people who do these really well have that really great eye for spacing. As far as I can tell, you can't, I mean, I'm sure you could like actually measure out and draw dots everywhere you want to pin if you wanted to be more precise, but I feel like these are just are supposed to be like kind of fun. Will I be making this an annual tradition? I don't think so. I had fun. I enjoyed it. I don't know that I enjoyed it enough. I guess if I do have some sequins that I find particularly inspiring, or I see some beads that are particularly inspiring, I would consider it. I would likely consider buying more of the satin. I think these were the most fun and the most creative. These guys were definitely creative, like the ones with the all over. You kind of like got your idea and then you just implemented. These ones were just a lot more on the go. I don't feel like this was the most structured video, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Just like definitely this felt more disorganized for me of a process, but crafting videos, I can't always tell what is actually going to be the output of them. And I think that's partially what makes them so fun, but I definitely don't have my formula down, so super open to feedback around how you'd like to see the structure of a crafting video like this, because I do plan on doing more of these in the next year, because I do have a lot of fun trying something new and different, even if I feel like there's a learning curve. I wasn't as good at it as I am at sewing, and so sometimes there's a bit of like feelings about that, I feel like, when you're on that beginner learning curve. But yes, I definitely still enjoyed it. I love trying new things, seeing what like fits into my lifestyle and what doesn't. I will see you next week. We are starting our final projects and wrap up and stats and stuff. So next week I will see you at 8 a.m. Pacific time like usual on a Friday, and we will be going through the rest of the things I sewed off camera this year. So I'm super excited about that. But as always, remember, if you are still around and enjoyed this video, definitely subscribe and stick around. I also have a Patreon where you can go over and support me. Running this channel is quite expensive and I don't make much money from it. Usually most years I lose money on this channel. In fact, I think all years I've lost money on this channel. Of course, you can always support me for free by giving me a thumbs up and commenting down below. I always love reading the comments. I'm finally back on my commenting, staying caught up game. And with that, I will see you next week. Bye!